Hello everyone, it is Aussie Select and welcome back to the channel finally for another prediction for the 2025 federal Australian election. It has been a month. I said that I would be doing these more regularly. However, there was sort of a bit of a interesting sort of turn of events with the polling. See, last time I did a video, it was a bit of a sort of a roundup. It was about 2.5 weeks ago. We were seeing the Labour Party come ahead a bit in the polls. It was around this time when the Rory Morgan poll was dropped. And I had a pretty similar prediction at that point in time to what I had in my previous video, and I didn't want to make another video, and I wanted to see sort of how trends went, and things were still sort of hanging in the coalition's favor a little bit. But then in early March, this YouGov dropped, which had the Labour Party ahead 51-49. And I thought, hey, maybe things are changing. There was also this Roy Morgan that was 51.5. But then we also had this news poll that was 51-49, which was pretty much status quo. It actually had an increase in the coalition primary vote. But since then, we've had YouGov again have 51-49. We've had Freshwater Strategy come in a bit closer. We've had Essential come in a bit closer. We've had an absolute blowout Roy Morgan. And then finally, we had a Redbridge, which had Labour ahead 51-49. And the previous actual national Redbridge poll had the coalition ahead on 51.5. Just a quick editor's note, guys. Since I recorded this video and while I was editing it, a new YouGov poll came out, which was 50-50 on the two-party preferred. This doesn't really change my prediction at all. And it also had some state-by-state voting intention numbers on a federal level, which were too different to the ones that were in the previous YouGov. So yeah, it doesn't really change much for the analysis of this video. For a bit, I wasn't sure about where things were going because of this sort of news poll, which was pretty status quo. But now we're really beginning to see a trend of things moving back to Labour. As you can see down here, there was quite a long period where the coalition were ahead. There was this period a little bit here where it was 50-50. And now Labour have definitely come back into the game. I am suspecting that if we do get another news poll, it's probably going to be after the budget. It will be maybe 50-50. If it's 51-49 against the coalition, well then, I'll have to make another video then. But there is absolutely a trend going on here. We are also probably going to be due in a couple of weeks the new Resolve Strategic, which was the big blowout poll to the coalition, which prompted me to suggest that the coalition might get up to 70 seats. I think I quickly sort of retracted that and said I was sort of overreacting a bit to these polls that came out here. We're also due a news poll quarterly in about a week's time. Once we get those polls, we'll get some good data on how things are going in each state and territory. We do have a little bit of data from states and territories through YouGov. I didn't actually realize until today that these polls existed. In New South Wales, the coalition is slightly ahead on the two-party preferred. In Victoria, the coalition are actually ahead 52.5, which actually mirrors very much things that Redbridge have noted in their tracking polls in Victoria, which is about like a 7.5% swing, so pretty big. In Queensland, it was kind of interesting because in this poll 2 weeks earlier, this is when the coalition were sort of at their highest point. The coalition were leading 62% to 38% on the two-party preferred, and then suddenly jumped to 50.5% to 49.5%. And like there's a dip here of 13% on the primary vote. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this. I mean, I would say that it's likely that there has been a bit of a turn in Queensland. This was actually just after the flood, so this might have been a bit of a reaction to Dutton leaving the floods for a fundraiser. And in Western Australia, Labor Party, quite similar results to what we were seeing in the state election, although the One Nation vote is much higher than what was received in the state election. And South Australia, kind of a middling result for the Labor Party, only on 51-49, which indicates that there is a couple of percentage points of a swing there in South Australia. And we haven't had much polling from Tasmania in a while, so hopefully we get some of that in the next coming weeks. And we've had no polling in Northern Territory, but that's not new. So I want to look a little bit at leadership ratings. It looks like Albo has reclaimed some ground in the last couple of weeks. We even saw this from the most recent news poll. If you see here, like there was a 5 point gap on last month's news poll, and in the most recent news poll, that gap has widened to 9%. So it looks like Albo definitely has, even in polls where the coalition are retaining on the two-party preferred, it looks like Albo has sort of increased his rating as preferred prime minister, although both leaders are sort of going up on the disapproval, but also up on the approval, because I assume more voters are sort of becoming aware of the leaders as we get closer to an election. I mean, there's no indication that Albo is going to sort of return to the heights he used to have a year or two ago, but maybe people are getting a little bit wary of Peter Dutton. It has been quite a few bad couple of weeks for Peter Dutton, and I've actually made a list of sort of not so popular things that have happened with him in the last couple of weeks, because there is quite a bit. So there's the whole shares issue, where it was revealed that he bought shares around the GFC. He might have had insider information about whether or not the government was going to be giving a lot of stimulus to banks. His housing portfolio was revealed, which kind of presented that he was sort of a member of the big end of town. Obviously, some people won't care about this because they see it as like aspirational and a good thing that he's like a master investor or something. Obviously, there was the leaving the cyclone to do fundraisers, which I think will particularly hurt him in Queensland. There's been a couple of like policy flip-flops. Like there was the whole insurance thing where he said that he wants to give divestiture powers to the ACCC, the breakup insurance companies, and then members of his government contradicted that. There was the thing where he was calling Albanese weak over the China warship, quote-unquote, stuff up, saying that Albo didn't know about it, and in fact, Albo did know about it and didn't reveal it because of national security. Similar issue with the caravan stuff up, where Dutton made a huge meal out of this obvious hoax, quote-unquote, terrorist plot, and it was revealed that like Dutton didn't appear in briefings that he could have to learn more information about this. There's this brain fart of an idea of a referendum for dual citizens, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but members of his government have really panned the idea, which is like allowing the government to strip someone's dual citizenship if they have committed like some kind of crime, basically giving a lot more power to government and making people who have dual citizenship maybe fearful. And there's this big thing of members of the Liberal Party are standing up against the coalition's nuclear policy. I think it's originally from a group of liberals in Tasmania. But we all know it's more than Tasmanian liberals that are against nuclear. I think it's a awful time to be dropping an ad like this. If they were going to do something like this, they should have done it like when Peter Dutton announced this policy instead of waiting till now when it's too late. They can't go back on it now. I think there is a chance for Peter Dutton to recover from these last couple of weeks when we get onto the budget, which I want to briefly talk about. So I was certain since December last year that the election would be on April 12th and that Albo would call an election directly after the WA election and there would be no budget. And that's pretty much what everyone was expecting. And then obviously the cyclone happened. So it looks like the election will be sometime in May. I'm not going to get into the guessing game of when in May it's going to happen. I haven't really heard too much information about why he would pick a certain date. I think he's stuffed. The election campaign is going to be like during a ton of public holidays, regardless of what he does. But yeah, Albo will have to go to a budget now. And this means that Jim Chalmers will have to deliver a deficit, and it will give the opposition an opportunity to crush the Labour Party on economic management, say that Labour is spending too much money, is going to cause inflation again, blah, 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 blah. I think there's probably just going to be a cash injection here and there on the budget. There's not going to be anything too radical in the budget because Albo wasn't expecting to go to a budget anyway. We also had it come out the other day that electricity bill is going to go up in most places by like up to 10% or something in July. I mean, it doesn't really matter, if it's fossil fuels or if it's renewable energy that's causing this price hike. The fact is that energy bills are going up and people are going to blame the government of the day for that. Unfortunately for the opposition, I think that as time goes by, the whole nuclear idea is not going to persuade that many people because it doesn't give immediate energy relief to the people. Like, these nuclear plants are not going to be built for another 10 to 15 years. And so the question is, what are you going to do in the meantime? And the coalition basically don't have an answer for that. I don't know if this will really hurt the Labour Party really that much. I think the big killer for Albanese is this big story of 200,000 overseas students coming into Australia on February. As I've said many times, immigration is the number one issue of this election. So many people are blaming the cost of living crisis on immigration. And for this to happen, for this headline to happen, is going to only fuel right-wing parties like the Libertarian Party, who used to be pretty pro-immigration actually, but have now taken a very anti-immigration stance, especially in New South Wales, and I believe maybe also Queensland as well. And then you got like Jared Rennick in Queensland, and you got like the Trumpeter Patriots and One Nation. You can be sure that the right-wing minor parties will make a meal out of this, but unfortunately for Dutton, the policy he's come up with is just a 25% reduction in the permanent migration, which has nothing to do with student numbers. I think he's made some vague promise about reducing student numbers, but he already voted against the bill that would have capped student numbers. So I don't think Dutton is going to win much from this other than vibes. He's seen as a bit more sort of tough on immigration, but he doesn't really have policies to reflect on this, and lowering the permanent migration count by 25% will be a huge challenge for him. So I think at the moment, Dutton is really just trying to win the election based on vibes. He's taken on a lot of sort of policies that are culture war policies, things like fighter jets, things like committing a lot of money to like rebuilding the synagogue in Melbourne, which I think Albo was also backed as well, putting questions about people's views on Jewish people in a citizenship test, and then also saying that like he's going to like negotiate something with Israel on day one of when he becomes prime minister. All of these things, they're trying to appeal to the coalition base, but I think a lot of people will be asking, like, on an election about cost of living, and where so many people of his base are really worried about immigration, why he's going after these sort of bizarre culture war issues, when really the populist approach would be to stick to the policy that he had at last year's budget of reducing net overseas migration to 150,000. It's completely absurd for him to do that, but I really thought that Dutton would be more tapping into that populist approach on immigration, which he is seemingly not doing. So the other thing that's really killing Dutton at the moment is the Trump factor, and I briefly mentioned this on my last roundup video, but Dutton earlier in the year was trying very hard to sort of like align himself very much with Trump's values. Back in like January, February, was having this sort of resurgence of popularity. His approval ratings were pretty high, but since then, Trump has soured very quickly, and I think that this sort of attachment to Trump that Dutton has given himself is ultimately going to hurt him going to this election. I think it already has hurt him. Here was Michaelia Cash saying back in February that Peter Dutton will have the exact same attitude as Trump. Dutton has described Trump as a quote-unquote big thinker when the whole like Gaza idea came out. Dutton was basically on Trump's side when it came to the whole trade war scenario, said that basically Albo needed to grovel more to Trump, needed to ring him up more, had to visit him more. Dutton hasn't given as much confidence to Australia's involvement if there is an escalation in the war between Ukraine and Russia, as Albo has. Albo said that he would put troops on the ground. Dutton says that's a bad move, which the public might think that Dutton is being too soft on Russia. Already last year, he appointed Jacinta Price as the Shadow Minister of Government Efficiency, very much calling to Elon Musk's Doge in the US, which has gotten a lot of criticism. And finally, Dutton has committed to cutting 36,000 public servants, again, sort of echoing the idea of cutting government waste, including not ruling out cutting the National Emergency Agency back when Cyclone Alfred was happening. And most recently, he has told public servants that they should expect to go back to the office. So I think all of these things are going to make it easier for people to sort of see Dutton as this Trump-like character in Australia. Obviously, he isn't planning on putting tariffs or something like that. That would go completely against Liberal Party ways, but I think Australians are getting pretty wary of the idea of changing governments to sort of an unreliable figure that sort of in many ways mirrors Trump, and I think that is ultimately hurting Dutton a lot. Dutton intentionally sort of tied his popularity to the popularity of the US president, and as the popularity of the US president falls in Australia, Dutton's popularity is falling as well. The budget will be a reset for both the government and the opposition. Dutton has to do a budget reply, and he might announce a bunch of new policies and a new vision for Australia. So I think next week will be an absolutely pivotal moment in this campaign. But for now, I'm going to look at how things have changed and what I can predict based on what has happened over the last couple of weeks. Right, so I think we're going to go from left to right this time, starting from WA. The video I made a week ago was discussing the federal prospects of the results from the state WA election, and the conclusions I came to is that I believe that Labor Party is going to maintain Tangney because the swing there was pretty underwhelming to the Liberal Party. Kate Cheney will retain Curtin because the swing was even more underwhelming in the state areas of where Curtin is. More, I think, will probably stay with the Liberal Party, although I think the state results showed that Ian Goodenough does have some kind of chance there. And then Pearce will very much remain with the Labour Party, even though I do think that there's going to be quite a big swing against them there. As for Bullwinkle, I think that it's more likely that the Liberals will snatch that seat than the Labour Party or the Nationals. The Nationals underperformed a little bit in that seat. The Liberals actually did pretty well. It looks like they're probably going to win the seat of Kalamunda, which is in the boundaries of Bullwinkle. And of course, I don't think that the WA Federal Labour Party are going to do as well as the WA State Labour Party. I think there'll probably be about a 4% difference between the two, but it should be enough for the Labour Party to hang on in Tangney, and there's not enough of a swing on for Kate Cheney to be removed in Curtin. As for South Australia, so Boothby, at this point in time, I don't think the swing is going to be on enough for the coalition to pick that one up. I think it's going to remain with Labour. Sturt is an interesting one. I think it's moving into toss-up territory. The question is if the Labour Party managed to pick up this seat, which has for a long time been pretty safe blue territory. They came pretty close last time, and the polls are pointing to a swing on in South Australia of about 2 or 3% towards the Liberal Party on a two-party preferred basis. However, those swings could be in these outer suburban areas or even like Hindmarsh or even out here in the sort of rural areas of South Australia. The swing might not actually be on in an area like Sturt, which has a lot of professionals and even has some areas of pretty strong Green support. I'm going to keep this one with the Liberal Party simply because, you know, cost of living is a thing, and I believe the people in Sturt are getting hit by that just as much as everywhere else. But if there's any seat on this whole map I think the Labour Party could pick up, it is Sturt. I just want to quickly talk about the Northern Territory. Look, we don't get very much data from Lingiari. All we know is that there's a federal swing away from the Labour Party, and Lingiari is on such a small margin. As I've discussed many times before, if we look at the Northern Territory election, the swing is enough in this area for the country Liberals, which I've marked here as the Nationals, to pick up. A forecast doesn't think that the country Libs are going to pick this one up. And I believe that there might be a bit of a sophomore effect here as well. I am going to give this one to the Nationals, but I think it's absolutely a toss-up, and it's very hard to predict with the very little information we have. Victoria, there is a lot of seats here to talk about. I'm going to start with sort of the possible Greens gains. So the Greens, I think, have had a good couple of weeks simply because of our relationship with the US is very quickly disintegrating. And the Greens, unlike the Labour Party, are very strongly anti-AUKUS. So I made a poll about a week ago for you guys to answer of whether or not ending AUKUS will help or hurt Albo politically going into the election. It ultimately came up with a majority of you thinking that it will ultimately hurt Albanese if he decided to drop AUKUS. I'm inclined to agree simply because I think that it would open up a point of weakness with Albanese, and it looks like Albanese is trying his hardest just to go into this election with as little drama as possible and let Dutton fall over. So, quite a while ago, it was actually before my most recent video talking about federal politics. So, yeah, it was 3 weeks ago. I made a poll asking you guys if you thought that Albanese could win with the strategy of just making a few small election commitments and then launching a purely negative campaign against Dutton and the coalition. And over two-thirds of you said no, that Labour could not get more seats doing this. But it feels like this strategy is actually kind of working for the Labour Party. The Labour Party have announced a few new things, like yesterday they announced a policy of reducing the PBS medication price to $25, which, again, the coalition matched. But Labour is mostly just letting Dutton and the coalition sort of fall over themselves, and that's what's really gotten them such a big strength in the polls in the last couple of weeks. At this point, I really did sort of agree with the vast majority of you who thought that the Labour Party couldn't make gains on this strategy, but it's been such a bad couple of weeks for Peter Dutton that it seems to actually be working. But going back to the AUKUS issue, the people of Australia really value stability, and I just think it puts way too much uncertainty on them if Albo decides to end an agreement like AUKUS and then Trump starts to get really mad at Australia. It might make Australians feel really unsafe. That's what he doesn't want at the moment. I think if Albo did come out at the moment that Trump said no tariffs and he decided, all right, that's it, I'm ending AUKUS, I think that actually could have been a very strong moment for Albanese. It could have gotten rid of a lot of the ideas around him that he is weak. I mean, him being weak is probably one of the strongest attributes that people assign to Albanese. So it would have helped him come across very strongly. But of course, he didn't do that, and it's too late now to do something like this. So I think, yeah, he has to stay with AUKUS at least until the election, and then if he wants to dump that policy, maybe he'll do it during the term. Obviously, he'll get a lot of flack for that from the Murdoch press. But going back to what we're discussing, I think that the Greens will ultimately benefit from the fact that the Labour Party is sticking with AUKUS and hence sticking with Donald Trump. And I think that it might just put the Greens over the line in Wills. There's also sort of an issue in Victoria where the Labour Party are sort of demolishing a lot of public housing and they're not really replacing it. And the reasons for why they're doing it aren't very clearly sort of explained. It just seems like a bit of a cash grab from the government. Now, Wills, I've actually looked up the area that Wills is in. There's not actually that much public housing in this electorate. There's a little bit in like North Fitzroy, but like that's about it. There is a little bit more in Cooper actually. So I think Cooper is definitely one we're going to watch. I think the margin's probably too big for the Greens to win that one, but I do think it will improve the Greens' chances there. I just think with like Israel coming back and starting their bombing again and the AUKUS thing and Albo clearly not caring about housing affordability and sort of climate coming back into the agenda again with this whole cyclone, I think ripe for the Greens to pick up another seat in central Melbourne. I still don't think it will be McNamara. I know there was a poll that came out recently by some right-wing think tank or something that suggested that the Greens actually might have a good chance in McNamara and less of a good chance in Wills, actually. But I think out of demographics, I just think Wills is probably the most likely for the Greens. Of course, I think the Greens will retain Melbourne. There is a lot of public housing there, and they'll be very angry at the Labor Party over that. As for these teal seats, I'm going to give them both to the respective teals. Look, Dutton is obviously doing a lot of pandering to the Jewish community. A lot of the Jewish community live in the seat of Goldstein. But I don't know if these people will see it as sort of maybe a bit too cynical and a bit too pandery to that community. I mean, there are Jews that are not too happy with what is going on in Israel and Palestine at the moment. So it's not like they're one big homogenous group. Zoe Daniels, I believe, did vote against that sort of hate speech legislation that went through the parliament a couple of weeks ago. So maybe like Dutton's going to try to attack her on that. I know there was also some like teal polls the other day from, again, a not very reputable pollster, which have voters in teal seats really want them to back the coalition if they get in government. And some people suggest that Zoe Daniels will be more likely to back Labour. I just think with this sort of war on public servants that Dutton is doing, and he said something about like women have to job share or something if they can't return back to the office 5 days a week. I think it's just going to fuel these teals to retain these seats. I don't think it's going anywhere. These teals are very popular candidates. And I think as days goes by, the idea of these teals possibly supporting a Labour government becomes less and less toxic. Look, I do think that Deakin is another one that the Labour Party could possibly pick up, but it looks like there is going to be quite a big swing against the Labour Party in Victoria, so it feels a bit weird to give a seat in Victoria to the Labour Party that was won by the coalition at the last election. Chisholm has quite a few professionals, but I do believe it has a lot of sort of conservative Chinese voters where maybe the sort of culture war stuff that Dutton is doing might actually appeal to them. I think this is becoming more and more of a toss-up seat as time goes by. I think there will be some people in this seat who might worry that Dutton might go a little bit too far with his immigration stuff. But generally, there is a lot of sort of like close the door behind you kind of immigrants in seats like Chisholm. And as for sort of the dual citizenship drama, a lot of the people who live in electorates like Chisholm are like Indian and Chinese, and actually those countries don't have dual citizenship, so they don't actually have to really worry about that policy. There's also the question of the suburban rail loop about whether or not it's actually sort of appealing to people who live in this eastern area of Melbourne. Look, many people believe that the suburban rail loop is a pipe dream, and even if it's going to be built in eastern Melbourne first, it's not going to be for quite a long time. So I don't think it's a huge vote winner. I'm going to give Chisholm to the Liberal Party. Bruce is a huge toss-up because it does have a few Sri Lankans in that seat, and Sri Lankans actually can get dual citizenship. And I think Sri Lankans make up something like 4% of the seat or something like that. And a seat like this is only becoming more and more multicultural. I know there's also some public housing in this seat, but they might also, again, be quite angry with Labour anyway. But there's just such a big swing in Victoria that makes me really think about if seats like Bruce are especially vulnerable. But the local member there, Julian Hill, is quite popular, has a lot of money, and has a lot of boots in the ground compared to the Liberal Party in a seat like this. So I think this one is also a big toss-up. I gave it to the coalition last video. At this point, I think it's probably going to remain with the Labour Party. There's just too much of like the Labour Party sort of base in a seat like this. And if Dutton is seen as like overly anti-immigrant, there's going to be a couple of people sort of spooked in a seat like this, and they'll say, no, I don't want to vote for him. McEwen is a different story. It is becoming more diverse as time goes by, but there's still a lot of sort of like English, Irish, Scottish ancestry in a seat like this. And it's the kind of seat that Dutton's rhetoric really does appeal to. I'm going to give this to the Liberals. But it's the kind of seat that if the trend continues, the Liberals are not going to win a seat like McEwen. Hawke, I'm going to stay with the Labour Party. At this point, the margin is a bit too big, although I wouldn't be overly surprised if the coalition manages to win it. There is a strong independent challenge in both Casey and in Monash. Oh, and in Wannon as well. These are all seats I expect to win by the Liberal Party, simply because I think there is a lot of people in Victoria who really don't like the Labour Party and don't want to risk them getting back into government, and so they're more likely to just vote for a Liberal. A big swing against Labour usually means a smaller swing to independents. Out of these three, of course, I think Alex Dyson has the biggest chance. I think he's going to get pretty close again, but I think he's going to just fall short. So that's one seat changed there in Labour's favour since my last prediction video. On to Tasmania. So Braddon, I think, is probably going to be the biggest swing to Labour in the whole country, simply because the member is retiring, and Labour are very big in support of the salmon fishing industry there. I still think it's going to remain with the Liberal Party, but keep an eye on this one. You might see something like a 6 or 7% swing to the Labour Party there. As for Franklin, there is a Teal independent going against Labour's position on the salmon farming industry. This is the only Teal independent I know of that's competitive against a seat held by the Labour Party. I still think that the Labour Party are going to win this seat, but if we go to the Tasmanian election, the seat does have some kind of independent base in it. And yes, I am aware that David O'Byrne is a former Labour member, but all I'm saying is that they are open to electing people who aren't a member of a political party. And it also has pretty high sort of Greens vote as well. I don't think the Greens will win because Liberal preferences will not go to the Greens. But if somehow this independent manages to get higher than the Greens and then overtakes the Liberal Party, then Labour might be in trouble. I'm not sure how much sort of the environmental movement against salmon fishing really matters in the seat of Franklin, but you know, cost of living is always an issue as well, and so maybe these people might be looking for an alternative. Tasmania does like their independence and their minor parties. As for Lions, again, we have very minimal information on Tasmania, so a lot of this is guesswork. But my guess is with trends continuing going back to the Labour Party, with Rebecca White being sort of a strong presence in a seat like there and a good campaigner, and the Liberal Party's sort of middling result in the Tasmanian state election, and they're facing a lot of instability at the moment, planning to privatise a bunch of stuff. I think it's highly likely that the Labour Party will actually retain the seat of Lions. Tasmania is a weird state. It actually swung towards the coalition last election. It's a very community-focused place, and I just think that Rebecca White is a good enough campaigner that she should be able to retain that seat for the Labour Party. So on to Queensland, and I, for some reason, didn't give Herbert to the coalition. Whoops. Leichhardt, the seat I've kind of walked past a lot in these predictions, simply because I don't think that there's going to be much of a swing on in Queensland, given that Dutton's seat is in Queensland. But with this whole floods thing and Dutton abandoning the state and the local member retiring, I think this one is maybe not as much of a done deal as I've said in the past. I think it will probably stay with the coalition, but again, if trends continue, this is one definitely to watch. I've also put Dixon and Longman back in sort of the I want to discuss category. Just, I don't know how much of a backlash it's going to be against Dutton with the whole floods thing. I think he'll probably be all right, but again, it's one to watch. I really want to see more polls coming out state by state. I really want to see that. That's one of the reasons I delayed making this video so much, because I wanted more data on that shit, and I haven't got much data on that. So, but the vibe I'm sort of getting is that Queensland is going to remain pretty status quo with both the seats and the two-party preferred. That is why I have given Blair straight to the Labour Party. I don't think it's even coming into contention anymore. As for these three Brisbane seats, look, I don't think the coalition are going to do very well. And the Greens are only going to strengthen on the whole AUKUS situation. And because of the fact that the climate debate has been reignited by the floods, and in a seat like Ryan, there's also the case of university students disliking very sort of anti-free speech policies of the coalition, and to the extent the Labour Party as well. Brisbane, you know, I think the Labour Party have a bit more of a chance there, and I apologise again for getting Brisbane and Griffith mixed up last video. But the seat of South Brisbane, which ended up going to the Labour Party, which was a Green seat at the Queensland state election, that's actually in Griffith. And I think Max Chandler-Mather is pretty safe there. Brisbane, I think there'll be a pretty tough battle between the Labour Party and the Greens. I just think with recent events and AUKUS and all that situation, the Greens will probably hang on to that seat. As for McPherson, definitely a strong independent challenger there, but I think that the coalition will hang on. Again, this is an area affected by the cyclone, so maybe that will push things more towards the independents' favour, but we don't really have the data to suggest that is what is actually happening. And on to New South Wales. So a lot of these seats, I have sort of just said, okay, the Labour Party's going to hang on to them, like Whitlam, MacArthur, Greenway, Eden Monaro, Macquarie, Shortland and Dobell. At this point, I don't think these seats are really becoming battlegrounds anymore. I think there will be a slight swing towards the coalition in New South Wales, but it won't be enough to tip over seats like this. Still, which is in contention, is Parramatta. This is one of the closest seats on the betting markets. Here's a map of the betting markets here. I actually made a video the other day about the current betting markets in Sportsbet. And on a seat-by-seat basis, it actually hasn't changed and suggests that the coalition will get about 70 or 71 seats. Last video, I suggested that the betting sites are predicted that the coalition will win on sort of the head-to-head two-party preferred result. Here, Labor's actually come in a lot, and this literally just happened the other day. They went in from $2.62 to $2.10 after the Redbridge poll was released. But I was saying that the coalition were the easy favourites here, but weren't the easy favourites when it came to electorate betting. I stand by that argument because suggesting that the coalition will only just get like 70 or 71 seats isn't really sort of a huge endorsement for them. I mean, there is a lot of sort of like very dicey sort of Labour seats here, but there's also some dicey sort of coalition seats as well. But yeah, Parramatta, I was even giving that to the coalition a couple of weeks ago. But I think firmly it will stay with the Labour Party. Too many professionals there, too many young families. And even the YouGov MRP released a couple of weeks ago didn't even give that to the coalition. So I just don't think it's going to happen. I want to talk a little bit about Watson and Blaxland. Now, the candidate for Watson, I believe his name is Zed Bahuni, something like that. The independent candidate for Watson. I actually live right near Watson, and I have seen a lot of signs for this guy. I've also seen signs for Tony Burke that have been defaced in this electorate as well. The stuff happening in Gaza and Australia's support for Israel. While Israel has struck Gaza during a ceasefire, along with the re-emergence of Zed. He kind of disappeared late last year, but he's kind of showing up again to campaign. Is going to actually bring this seat back into contention again. I sort of wrote it off a while ago. I still think Labour are going to win both of these seats, especially Blaxland, where Jason Clare is really popular. But Tony Burke better be worried. I don't think it's sort of a done deal. As for Fowler, the question is if Vietnamese people might be a little bit scared about the idea that Daley might support the coalition in the event of a hung parliament, because Vietnamese are eligible for dual citizenship. Many Vietnamese who live in the seat of Fowler might actually already have dual citizenship. And Daley has been quite sort of pro the coalition on a lot of issues. So unless she comes out and expressly says, yes, I'm going to support the Labour Party in the event of a hung parliament, I think some of those voters might be worried, and that issue could end up handing this seat back to Labour. But I'm going to give that to Daley for now. I have been in this electorate too, and I have seen a couple of signs for Tulay. So definitely not a done deal there either. As for Werwa, there is a lot of Iraqis, Lebanese, Vietnamese living in a seat like Werwa. I think the swing is going to be on in a seat like this. I think because of immigration and infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, blah, 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 blah. But it's not like Victoria where there's going to be a big statewide swing. The polls are not suggesting that. So I think maybe some of these people who are worried about the possibility of the government deporting them will vote with the Labour Party, even if they're mad at them, just because they might fear Dutton a little bit too much. Bennelong is almost a twin seat with Chisholm. They have a lot of things in common, a lot of professionals, a lot of East Asians. Again, Chinese can't hold dual citizenship, but Koreans can, and there is a percentage of people who live in Bennelong who are Korean. I think this one is, again, moving back to the toss-up column. What it does have in common with Chisholm is both of these seats have the sophomore effect. Their member was only just elected, and it is shown that this actually helps a bit. In the past, this was seen as a pretty safe bet of a Liberal pickup. They actually hold the seat notionally as well, the Liberals. But I think this is one that the Liberals have to really worry about at this stage. I'm going to give it to the Liberals. But again, if the trend continues, they're going to lose this one. As for these seats over here, I think they're all going to be won by Teals. Obviously, Zali Steggall has the best chance. Sophie Scamps might have to worry about backlash due to her support of an independent who supported council rate hikes. But just generally, the kind of stuff that Dutton is going on about is not going to help him in this kind of area. Every day he talks about cutting the public service and how women have to job share and stuff like that. It's not going to help him here. Robertson is very much the bellwether seat, and with this sort of increase in Labour support in the last couple of weeks, I'm going to give this seat to the Labour Party. I think it's going to be close, but there's a strong local member. I also think that in next week's budget, one of the bigger things that the Labour Party are going to announce is a big cash injection into high-speed rail. And the local member there, Gordon Reid, is one of the big proponents of high-speed rail. The Labour Party will get a swing against them here, but I don't think they're going to lose it. Patterson fits the demographics of a Liberal gain. quite white, quite a lot of tradies, experiencing a lot of cost of living stress. It just fits the bill of a liberal pickup. It's exactly the kind of people that Dutton will actually be appealing to. Going out to regional New South Wales, we have Richmond, which in the past, again, I have just said, oh, this is going to go to the Labor Party. But with this whole reemergence of the floods and the cyclone, the topic of climate change is coming back into the fold. I think the Labor Party will probably retain this seat, but I think the Greens do have a decent chance here to make another good run against them at this coming election. Cowper, I'm not sure how much this was affected by the floods, but there was a by-election in Port Macquarie, which at least part of it is located in Cowper, and the Nationals performed pretty reasonably there. They got a primary vote swing towards them. So I think the Nationals will retain this seat, but I think it's one that they do have to worry about. As for Claire and Andrew G, I think Andrew G is getting a bit more popular. There is Kate Hook running there as well. Again, one to watch, but I think the Nationals will retain. Hunter, I just think the local member is a bit too popular and the swing won't be enough on in New South Wales for the coalition to grab that seat. Again, it's the kind of seat that the coalition are probably appealing to. And I've heard that a lot of people in Hunter do actually really like the idea of a nuclear power plant in their electorate. They think it'll provide a lot of jobs, be a good replacement for coal. I think that the Labour Party will probably hold that one on just a small margin. And as for Gilmore, I know that there's some retired public servants. I think it isn't as much of a sure bet as it was in the past, but I still think that the Liberal Party are probably going to pick this one up just on the back of like anger at Albanese over cost of living, the usual stuff. So this is my final prediction for now. The Labour Party will be on 69 seats. I think that there's going to be a swing against them in a lot of these places where I've still given them seats. I think that they'll hang on in a lot of places by a very small margin, 2 or 3%, something like that. But they will hang on nonetheless. They will produce a lot more marginal seats going into the election after this, but they will nonetheless hang on to a lot of seats. If the trend continues, I obviously think the Labour Party can actually do a couple of seats better than this. I still very much think that the Albanese government is on the nose. I just think that Peter Dutton in the last couple of weeks, it's been a really couple of bad weeks for him. It's going to trash sort of the idea of him being a suitable alternative government. I know in that news poll a couple of weeks ago, there was sort of a question about whether or not the opposition is ready to lead. And most people don't think they're ready to lead. They don't think Albanese should govern, but they don't think that the opposition is really ready to lead. So I don't know about double haters. I don't know if people hate both of the major parties, but they definitely don't really like the major parties. And so even with there's so much dissatisfaction against Albo, and it's not going away, there's a lot of people who really don't like him and they see a lot of bad qualities in him. But with this dissatisfaction against him, that's why I still think that they're going to lose definitely a handful of seats to the coalition and maybe to some others. But the coalition getting enough seats to get anywhere near a majority, it just seems like it's not going to happen at this point. I just think Dutton is just way too much on the nose. So how many seats have they got here? 64 seats. So that's like 12 seats off getting majority. Again, the best prediction I've ever made for the coalition was 70 seats. And that was just in like one post reacting to when we had that really blowout Resolve strategic poll a couple of weeks ago, which was actually, most of that was respondent allocated preferences. So my final thoughts on this is that I am predicting currently a Labour government with confidence and supply from some Teals, some of these minor parties maybe. I still think that they are going to try to avoid getting into government with the Greens at all costs. And I also think there is a strong likelihood that there will be a few more independents than I'm predicting. There's just so many competitive independents running in this election that it makes things really unpredictable. And I think we're going to need to wait to a few more MRPs and some credible seat-by-seat polls before we can make sort of a really accurate prediction on some of these seats. So let's go on to AE forecast and see how they're viewing things. Labour have made a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks. According to this website, it has the two-party preferred on 50-50. I still think that the coalition are going to end up higher on the two-party preferred than the Labour Party. But with such a high third-party vote, it might not actually matter too much. who wins the two-party preferred. And if you go back to, like, say, the 1998 election, where the Howard government only just entered government, in an election like that, the two-party preferred didn't actually matter that much. Labour won the two-party preferred 51-49 and still lost the election. The last video I did, it had the two major parties basically on like an equal seat count. This one has the Labour Party well ahead, has a better prediction for the Labour Party than me. If we go to that big blowout resolve strategic poll, where I thought that the coalition could win 70 seats, this is definitely when Labour were in the dumps, and then since then it's just gone sort of up and up for them, like especially on that Morgan poll, which I didn't treat that seriously, but we've just seen the Labour Party sort of improve in their position. He's even saying like the Labour Party are sort of the favourites in Patterson, which I find a bit odd, and Chisholm. And here's where in Lingiari he thinks there's a 63% chance of the Labour Party winning. Robertson, like a 64% chance. Bruce, he thinks there's like a 71% chance. But yeah, but definitely been a good couple of weeks for Labour, or rather a bad couple of weeks for the coalition. Labour Party only just sort of dipping over 30% on the primary vote. And again, I almost forgot about the Senate, but what can I say? I don't think there's really that much of a change here. I think the idea of the coalition getting 3 seats in Queensland is falling very flat very quickly. I don't think it's probably going to happen. New South Wales, I just think it's too close to 50-50 for someone else other than the coalition to win the last seat there, but there's always a chance. In Victoria, it's sort of the same kind of thing. I think with the coalition even in front on the two-party vote, they'll probably win 3 seats there. Tasmania, we always don't know, but it's quite likely that we'll get a status quo result there, and I should be giving that seat to Lambie. I'm sorry, she's not an independent. South Australia, I mean, the two-party preferred, according to that latest YouGov poll, was closer than some of the other polls I've seen, but I still think the One Nation Party has enough support there to get that last seat. And WA, sort of interesting because the Labour Party did poll really well in that last YouGov poll. They did very well at that latest state election. I don't know if it's enough for them to win 3 seats again, but that last seat after the coalition get 2 is quite competitive. It could go to the Cannabis Party. They sort of underperformed a little bit at the state election, only got around like 3%, so maybe not. One Nation also underperformed. They only got about 3.5%. They might still get 2 seats, but like 3%, I don't know if that's enough to win a Senate seat. They did really well in that latest YouGov poll, so maybe there's always a chance. And the other sort of wild card is the WA Nats. I don't have like its own sort of like box for the WA Nats, but they ended up getting like 5.5% in the upper house in the state election, which might be enough to win them an upper house seat. I don't know if the WA Nats can pull off like a similar result in the federal election as they can in the state, but they did reasonably well in the state election, and they would definitely succeed through One Nation preferences. So just pretend that last seat, I'm predicting a WA Nat is actually going to win that last seat. I mean, I could just put Cannabis here and we could pretend that it's a WA Nat. Oh, and then we've got the ACT, where I do think that David Pocock and Labour will win their status quo results. And I went back and watched my prediction video from September last year. The only thing that's really changed is I think that in WA, the coalition might struggle to win that last seat, and it might be won by someone like the WA Nats or Legalised Cannabis or One Nation. So again, not a bad Senate for the Labour Party, terrible Senate for the coalition if this ends up being what it is. But it looks like at this stage they probably won't be in government anyway. But who knows? We have a budget coming up. We'll give Jim Chalmers, who is a very good communicator, we'll give him the ability to really strengthen Labour's message. But then we have Peter Dutton with the budget reply, where he might actually be able to write a new narrative for the party. Things could change very rapidly. They sure have changed rapidly in the last couple of weeks. Last prediction video, I was actually suggesting that the coalition would win 1 more seat than the Labour Party in my prediction. But this was like just before we had that like disastrous poll for Labour, that resolved strategic poll. It was around this point in time when I made that prediction. And things have gone, very south for Peter Dutton very quickly. Just briefly, I put this poll up the other day about if the curse of incumbent governments losing terribly, which we've seen in the last couple of years, is finally over. And the consensus, like, pretty much said that the curse is still there, but like sort of the economy around the world is doing a little bit better now. Obviously, Australia's only just coming out of a per capita recession. So yeah, I agree with this. And also that Trump is strengthening incumbents. I think he's particularly strengthening center-left incumbents because people are sort of fearing what a right-wing government might get up to when they get in power if they're going to act like Trump. I think the world generally is moving at the moment away from demanding economic change to perhaps valuing stability a little bit more. I still think there's an anti-establishment trend going on, but there's also a concern that we don't want to end up like America. We don't want to end up with that kind of instability. And so I think Albo has benefited a little bit off of this. So I don't usually do this, but today I'm going to beg for subscribers. I've been sitting on just over 1.5k for a while now. I would like to get to 1.6k by this weekend because I really want to make a 1600 subscribers special video. I wanted to actually do one for 1000 and then stuff happened and I ended up doing other videos instead, and then I wanted to do it for 1500 but then the WA election sort of got in the way. So when I get to 1600 I'll be doing a 1600 subscribers special and there'll be some fun stuff going on with that. And then my goal is to get to 2000 subscribers before the election is called. Maybe that's a bit too lofty, but we'll see. And then my goal is to get to 2,500 subscribers by the election. So please help me in my goal. If you like my videos, subscribe to the channel. I will definitely still be doing those videos state by state, territory by territory, giving a lot more detailed analysis for how each seat is going to go. I think it's a good thing that I have waited this long though, because things have obviously changed a lot in the last couple of weeks and months. And there's other videos I want to do. I still want to do a video on housing and immigration. It'll probably be one video at this point. And I think this weekend I might also do a video on high-speed rail because, again, I think it's going to be a big part of the budget and I'd like to give my thoughts on it before the budget is delivered. So thank you for watching, everybody, and I will be seeing you very soon. Goodbye.